60 to 80 hour work weeks, like very little self-care. Like my work was who I was completely. And I loved it, but also like at times I was like, what am I doing? You know, and I was experiencing multiple health issues, particularly chronic headaches. For really migraines is the more appropriate word for years.
Wow.
And just on the side, you know, I looked into various treatments, but ultimately it was stress. It was too much stress and not enough sleep.
Welcome to the More Business, More Life podcast. And today I have Jonas, the founder and creator of Aura Cacao. And it's so near and dear to my heart because it's been a part of, for those of you that have been following my healing from the Guillain-Barré syndrome, but also me as a leader. It's opened my mind, my heart, and my energy level and creativity so that I can be a better leader and also be a better father, be a better husband. And on top of that, we're going to talk about how does this happen chemically. We're going to talk about the farming of cacao. We're going to talk about how this cacao is different than other cacaos and why, and how it makes such a great impact and been such a great impact on my life. And we're going to cover so many things. You're going to want to listen in. So let's jump in and welcome Jonas. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Really honored to be here.
It's so good. This is kind of feeling like an official thing that we're starting to do, even though it's been unofficial or whatever you want to call it for so many years, because it's been so easy for me to share your work with the world because of the great impact it's made on my life. And so having Aura Cacao in my life has helped me in so many ways, even before I went through my medical episode with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is attacking the nervous system. And we know how much fat is needed to recover in that. And so bringing so many good fats and then even a carrier of all the minerals. And then I've also added a lot of mushrooms. And so you put that with cacao, it's like, whoa. So, I mean, I didn't mean to start off right with a commercial, but this is like real in the heart. And so, I mean, the first thing is just huge gratitude for you being inspired to do this work.
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure and honor to do this work. I mean, in the same way that you naturally just share the cacao with everybody that you come in touch with, like, that's why I started making it, because I was like, this is changing my life. This is a profound medicine. And I didn't even know to the degrees which it would impact my life, you know, but I just kept taking it one step at a time. And through people like yourself, it's grown and gotten out there. And it's like, that's the spirit of the cacao. It's heart-centered and it's healing and it wants to be shared. So thank you.
It's again my pleasure and you're welcome. And so I think today we're going to talk about so many different things, because the aspect of the healing part, the aspect of activating our energy in our good work on the planet, and because both of us know other founders and CEOs and entrepreneurs that, you know, they want that good energy, not, you know, something superficial or short-lived or overstimulated, and to have that grounding creative spirit with the cacao into your work is so beautiful.
Yeah, so I couldn't imagine being an entrepreneur without cacao these days, and I'm sure you agree.
Yeah.
Because it's just so supportive of all the, you know, both the creative highs and then the like day-to-day operational challenges that it takes to run a company and like bring our hearts into the world and expose our hearts to the world. Yeah. You know, that needs like some pretty intense nervous system regulation and a strong self-care practice. And having come from the tech world in San Francisco Bay Area and startups and like lived that pace and that lifestyle, even doing sustainable things, it like burnt me out. And I realized it's not sustainable to be burning ourselves out either. So there needs to be a more holistic integration in the culture of doing the work that we're passionate about.
It's so huge. Like what you just said brings up multiple things. So we'll have to go in there, because I want to talk about love and business, because some people think that those shouldn't be together. Like people have actually said that to me. So I want to bring that. But then also let's start with the fast pace, because obviously, you know, my trademark and this show, More Business, More Life, is about that. It's that we can do this good business and do the good work on this planet while we also have our life. And I too, I grew up in Silicon Valley. I, you know, started multiple companies, And I did have a saying, I'll sleep when I die. Like, I mean, that's how, I'm going to be honest, that's how bad it was. And it wasn't just the drive to make money. Obviously, I wanted to be profitable to keep things going, but I was very passionate about my work. And so the initial thought is, I'm so passionate, like, I'll just work. And it actually did make it feasible, but it was not healthy at all. And I think you just brought that up. You know, we both have had those episodes where we're working too far to the point where we're affected. So maybe can you share a little bit of what it was like before you had all these ahas, just so people can get like a compare and contrast from where we're going to go? Like, what was it like when you were in that Silicon Valley fast pace?
I mean, 60 to 80 hour work weeks, like very little self-care. Like my work was who I was completely. And I loved it, but also like at times I was like, what am I doing? Yeah. You know, and I was experiencing multiple health issues, particularly chronic headaches. Or really migraines is the more appropriate word, for years.
Wow.
And just on the side, you know, I looked into various treatments, but ultimately it was stress. It was too much stress and not enough sleep. And I also had some chronic knee pain from injuries earlier in my life that I, you know, was ignoring. I wasn't making the time or space to take care of my body. And I was in my 20s, and, you know, youth is lost on people. So it was a time that I could do that.
Yeah.
But it didn't make sense.
Yeah. And I could relate to that because it was from 19 to 31. So the whole 20s, that 12-year period was like my sacrifice years. To the point where I was overweight, like 290 pounds. Like, you can't even imagine, because now I usually run like 185, 190. So like 100 pounds. And then having heart palpitations. I remember at 31, I went home, and I was married at this point now, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And my wife was able to calm me down. It was like a panic attack, but it was all the stress, all the things. And I was eating maybe like one meal a day, because I would even skip the meals to keep working. And it wasn't like a stupid, like, I wasn't like, I guess maybe I was stupid and insane, but it was the passion. Going back to what you said, I was all in on the mission, but I was like, and that doesn't work, like, because we talk about sustainability all the time on our planet and in modern society, yet so many of us are not working in sustainable ways, and nor was I. Like, I was on my way for a short life.
Yeah, totally. And it's, you know, it's not just the technology that needs to be sustainable. It's the culture. It's how we treat each other and how we treat ourselves and our health and all those, because that affects everything that we create. Yeah. And I actually forgot to mention that I also had very little room for my emotional space. You know, I had little room for that, like, expansive, for dreams, for all the things that actually drive and feed creativity and that are also really important parts of the human experience. I was just shoving all that aside, suppressing it down. And that's where, like, long-term health crises come from too, you know, if you're not tending to your emotional state. And like having room for discharge and healing and long-term trauma work and all of that.
And even the day-to-day, the long-term, absolutely, and the day-to-day. Because from just adding on, I know I was not the happiest person some of the days. And I suppose with the migraines, I just know I didn't have as much, I guess, I'm missing the word, but, you know, it's the patience. I guess that's the word. I mean, because you're like so exhausted, tired. And so, if, you know, my patience wasn't as there, and I know that I would lose my cool sometimes, and I probably mistreated people. And everyone I can, I try to apologize for those early days, but I wasn't always the happiest person because I was under so much stress. And I know that so clearly because I can compare it now to all the compassion I have. And, you know, no matter what we're doing, if someone needs me, like, I drop everything and I'm there for them. And that just wasn't possible in my 20s. I'm like, oh, I got to get the next thing. I'm so sorry you're feeling that way, but let me run over here. So how was that like for you? Like with those migraines, like, did you feel that too on your day to day, or how was it for you?
I mean, it was, I didn't know what to do about it. You know, I was at my wit's end. I kind of just managed with it. I actually was not somebody who wanted to take medication because I felt like the migraines were telling me something.
Yes.
And I was like, almost like self-punishment, but like keep them around until you figure them out, you know, and use that as a compelling force to help me heal. But yeah, for a long time, I made very little progress. You know, I just like, it was the lifestyle underneath that needed to heal and shift. So
Yeah.
it was definitely impacting my performance, and I think that too with the just like the emotional stress and capacity. You know, I didn't have the capacity that I do now, nowhere near the capacity, and that impacts like creativity, leadership, problem solving, interacting with other people, and like those are all like crucial workplace skills. And so not bringing those to the table, I would say, even though I had a high output, I made up for those things by working crazy long hours. I was making up. I was probably, that was still like half my capacity. And making all those shifts and actually working less, I can operate at a far higher capacity because I'm making room for the creative problem solving, which is, you know, you can spend hours bashing your head into a problem and not getting anywhere, or you can step back, take care of yourself, and then the insight comes in, and that's like way more effective use of those few hours. And that's just like one small example of how to work differently and smarter.
Yeah, and so talking about that, like, you know, let's first go to the decision. So what was the marker? So you had all this, and then I want to dive deeper into that's solving problems in less time. What was the moment? Because we're talking about all this leading up, you're making those sacrifices. Was there a moment where you saw the change, like a cocoon moment, like the caterpillar coming and then you became the butterfly, or was it a gradual?
There were multiple markers.
Okay.
So my first startup in solar, a friend of mine had raised money, and I was in grad school, and I just left to join his company and was finishing my degree. And then actually when I finished my grad degree, I also left that company. And that was at the compelling of a girlfriend, you know, who was just like showing me an alternative way of life, and was just like, I want to travel to Mexico for 2 months. I'm like, wow, I could never take off 2 months on this job. And incidentally, on that trip to Mexico is where I met Cacao.
Okay.
You know, and it's like I had to leave that job to create space for the life-changing kind of opportunities and to be in love and all those things.
Yes.
I wanted to go to festivals, you know, and I noticed my coworkers were all working so hard that they resented me for any amount of time that I would take off to take care of myself and to like be a more multifaceted person. And that didn't feel good. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you know, I would take off a day. And that was like a huge issue. So that, and it wasn't like super explicit, but it was subtle and I could feel it. Yeah. And I also noticed, I saw people that were really good in so I took a second job a few months later because I kind of like left my job, had no plan, encountered Cacao, was passionate about Cacao, but didn't want to start a business or anything. Had no thoughts of that.
Okay.
And then a contact of mine in solar who actually was running a competing company reached out, and I was like, hey, I really want you to work for us. And I was like, well, I'm burnt out. I was traveling to China like every single month, troubleshooting issues we were having. Like I was just completely done. And I was like, the only way I'll work is if I can work half-time remotely from like a cabin in the ocean where I'm gonna live with my girlfriend and like study permaculture, because I knew I had to get myself in nature. I knew nature was just like part of the solution that I was looking for. And then what was the other condition? Half-time, not travel to China. And you know, he was game. He was like, cool, I'll enable this lifestyle for you. I'll come out, we'll go walk the beach, and then just find me a whiteboard so that in the yurt we can brainstorm ideas, and then I'll ship in all the electrical components you need. So he actually made it like the most optimal version of my job as a mechanical electrical engineer and product designer. Wow. And still, after a couple of years of that, I realized my heart was still missing something. My soul was needing something more, which was, on one side, it was engagement with community. I was designing products for people halfway around the world, and I just like needed more social connection to the work that I was doing. Right. And then the other part of it was that I saw people who were really good in my field, and I saw how passionate they were about it. And I saw myself, and I saw that I was really good at it, but not that good. And I want to be the best at what I do. And I just realized my heart wasn't in that work, even though it was having the impact I was desiring. That was different from what I personally needed. It was kind of more this concept of what the world needed.
Yes.
And how I could support that, but it wasn't linked back to that personal sustainability mission of what did I really need.
Yes.
And so that's where the cacao came in. I noticed how here's the turning point. I noticed how every time I started working with cacao, I would just light up. I'd have endless energy.
Yeah.
I was just so curious and excited about it. And then every time I would open my laptop to do the coding and then work on circuit boards, like I was struggling so hard with fatigue. Like I just shut down, and it was like pushing this huge ball uphill. Like I just couldn't do it anymore. And after months of struggling with that, I had to throw in the towel, and that felt like a breakup because it was such a good job. The team understood me. It was really hard to leave that.
And they bent all the rules so you could.
Yeah. And that's also when it's like, well, if it's not this, then it's got to be something different. Yeah. And the last straw also was my grandma passed away. And I remember I was in Germany when I filed for the LLC paperwork for the chocolate business, because just, death is so confronting. And that happening made me realize life is short, and why try to fit myself in this path that clearly I'm getting these signals that's not my path. So that pushed me over the edge to be like, you have the confidence to make that leap and start my own business.
It's so, and sorry for that loss, but then also it's such a gift that your grandmother gave you in a way. As I started exploring my growth and personal growth, you realize that death is that indicator. Like so many times in our life, I find that people that are afraid to talk about death are the people that are most not living, right? And when we can have these discussions, then it makes a huge difference for what we're doing in our life and making those choices, because this is our life, right? Yep. So it is so powerful. And you brought up something really big, because you brought up the lack of being able to notice our feelings because we're so busy, but then you're also indicating that there was enough awareness. And I want to bring that up really loud right now, because one of the core values in my company is fun, or even to say joy, like have joy in all we do. And I think it's overlooked because we have this freedom of choice, and we choose to ignore our feelings, or even train to, right? Like just to numb it all out. But even though it's a guiding light, like spiritually, if we want to call it that or whatever, it's just something inside of us. And that's why they say follow your heart, right? It's like screaming out of you. And you're just a great example of this, because here you're doing something you're really good at, that you're sought after. Companies are willing to do all these changes to honor what you want so they could have your expertise. Yet it was bringing you fatigue, and your body was saying no. And good for you for listening, because some people have done their whole career that way, and they'll be 60, 70 years old and be like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Right? And then you listened, and now you have Ora Cacao, which is giving life to all kinds of industries, which we'll get to in a minute. But like, I'm so happy that you brought up feelings, because that is such a big part of what I teach in More Business, More Life, because I think in modern society, and it's not just in the United States of America. I mean, like I think all over the world, we're ignoring our feelings. So the question for you, Jonas, is like, when you start noticing, because you even said a few minutes ago that you were ignoring your feelings, when did you notice these feelings coming louder and louder? And then when did you know like something needed to take action,
Yeah, it actually started the senior year of college, because my mom passed away suddenly. And that was something I was completely unprepared for at that point in my life. I'd never had anybody close to me die, and I lived surrounded in a society that idealizes youth and has very little discussion about death. So I was completely blindsided, and quite frankly, I thought the way to get through it was to take more classes. That was going to make me happy. And it very quickly became apparent that wasn't the strategy. Like I physically collapsed. I had to go start seeing a therapist, and I actually reduced my course load to the minimum that they would let me, fighting it the whole way. Like every time I let go of a class, and I was like, oh gosh, this is the worst thing ever. Like that's how much I believed that was my path towards happiness. But what happened in therapy was actually profound. The counselor one, for the first time, inquired about my dreams. No adult had ever inquired about my dreams, and I do have vivid dreams, and that became an unlock to accessing emotion and like other guidance about my state in the world. And then she also began teaching me an emotional vocabulary. Believe it or not, as a man growing up, I had very little emotional vocabulary. I felt things, but often didn't know how to put the word to the feeling what I felt. And so that was this like very slow rewiring process, you know, and at first it was like I'd feel something, and then like an hour later I'd be like, oh, maybe it's that. And that was even progress compared to having to look at the whiteboard of all the possible emotional states and be like, oh, is it that one or that one? You know, it's like, it was a complete training from scratch. And I can't believe that I grew up that way. But I did, you know, that's just kind of the culture and what was valued. And for me, it was performance in school above all else.
Right.
And performance in work. And so that had started in college. And so that process was just kind of naturally in progress during the early stages of my career. I also started dancing. I realized that I loved dancing. That was something completely not career related. And the process, and again, that was something that was enormously difficult to me. I had very little connection to my body, admired people dancing and wanted to dance like that, but didn't know how to connect. But I just almost religiously showed up to this practice to just dance and dance and dance. And I had a few dance teachers who really made the connection between dance and emotional states. They said that every movement pattern that we have in our body, like if we notice ourselves dancing and doing the same thing, they would challenge us to break that movement pattern, because most likely that movement pattern was hiding some sort of emotional state or trauma in the body, and that if we broke it physically, then it would set more in process behind the scenes. And so I began, that just made sense to me, and it felt like a way that I could access my emotions in a way that wasn't like sitting down in therapy. And so that process was simultaneously at work. And then when I did relocate out of the city into nature and was just surrounded by, you know, ocean and earth and sky, sitting around a fire every week with other people who were watching the birds and looking at the animals and telling stories, like something really began connecting in terms of like, oh, this is a healthy culture. Like, This is what it looks like to be sustainable, to be in relationship with the earth. You know, it's there's not much technology involved there, but there's this culture though that felt vibrant and alive. And I began to process and really began understanding the symptoms of my mom's death, or the root causes and kind of everything that had led up to this terrible trauma in my family. That's where I really began doing that work, and that's right when Cacao came into. Like I think I was in Oaxaca in May 2012, and then started this program, 9-month permaculture program, in September 2012. And so the cacao was like fresh in. I didn't even really know the potency of the plant medicine that I was working with, and this process was really beginning to deepen, because now I was working half time. I had more space, and I was in the nature and the community that supported that.
It's so beautiful. And I don't believe in coincidences. As I've gotten older, just everything happens on purpose. And then here you are coming to this stage in your life, dealing with the emotion and thank you so much for sharing your heart today with everyone, just being so vulnerable to share about the experience with your mother and your experience with your grandmother. Well, you're having these work experiences and you collapse all that in time and then have cacao introduced. And all these feelings come and the dance come. And so then it led you to make the decision. And so because you signed the papers in Germany, while it was happening with your family, with your grandmother, you were already on the verge and you're like not knowing. And then you decided, or you're already like maybe just to that point. I know it's like getting in the weeds for a second, but you literally decided in that moment, and you just called someone in the US and said, hey, can we make this company, or how'd that go?
Yeah, I mean, you can file an LLC online pretty easily, but I actually, even more so than the papers, I remember ordering my first pieces of chocolate equipment from like the upstairs in my grandparents' house. There's like a kind of furnished attic.
Yeah.
And so I was up there and then it was like, okay, I'm logging online. I'm getting the payment wired to set this in motion. I didn't even have a space to put it in yet. It was just like, I know I need tools because I know in Oaxaca, Mexico, I learned the process of making cacao by hand.
Okay.
And I learned, and then I had gotten some very small home scale tools to do that process. But I knew if I wanted to start any sort of business, I'd have to make it at a scale that wasn't just 5 pounds of cacao at a time.
Yes.
And so that's when I began looking into, small commercial scale chocolate making tools. And that was part of my thesis, was that the cacao I had experienced in Oaxaca, Mexico by hand, traditional methods, where there was this energy in the cacao that I had just never experienced in any commercially produced chocolate. And so I felt like, knowing engineering and knowing heat transfer and fluid dynamic and process control, that there must be something in the industrial process that was losing this essence that was in the cacao made by hand. And I felt like it was quite possible to mimic that traditional process using machines. Like there's nothing inherently bad about machines we use machines and tools all the time, but it's the right usage of that and staying in tune to that essence and committed to not losing it.
Yes. So that's beautiful. And we've talked many times. I've never gotten this deep with you on that. That's beautiful. So then you brought the machines in and you looked at how you could accomplish that. And then did you quickly notice that it was working? Because I can feel the difference when I drink your chocolate. I do feel that essence, like it's like having grandma's cooking and all the love. And so I think, maybe it is the machines, but also it's all your love. Like you bring so much love to this company. Just knowing you, and I want to bring that on camera right now because not everyone gets to sit with you like I do get to today. Mm-hmm. But I think you are bringing that love, because when I think about making it by hand, right, it's pouring that love, right? You're literally holding that love. But I think you're holding that love. But then I guess geeking out on that for a second, like how did you bring that into the machines, as you're saying? Like you literally mechanically figured out how to do it as well?
Yeah. So when we talk about hand making something, right, our hands are physically connected to our heart. So it's this outpouring of our heart energy into what we're creating. And I think that's where actually all my schooling in mechanical engineering and electrical and software engineering, it taught me to make machines an extension of myself. Like there were no small scale chocolate making equipment, or it existed, but it didn't do what I wanted it to do. Okay. So pretty much everything in my original chocolate factory, I either assembled from scratch or I hacked it. And so I had a very intimate relationship with every tool, and it would break down and I'd have to fix it. But I would say that process of my hands being involved in the process it never left, because those machines, I was so familiar with them. And you're right, it's more than just the machines that goes into it. It's the intention and the spirit behind it. It's the cacao that I was sourcing, the whole way through. I never lost the connection to cacao as medicine. Like that was always my intention with making it. I knew that I didn't want to make chocolate candy. In fact, one of the things I discovered before I committed to starting the business was that sugar was part of my headache problem. And I went cold turkey on sugar, and it significantly reduced the intensity of my headaches. And then I pretty quickly, after a couple of weeks, had the problem of like, what do I do about chocolate? Because I knew I wanted chocolate in my life.
Yes.
And so the class, and where I had started was making 70% dark chocolate with cane sugar. That was kind of what was considered dark chocolate back then.
Okay.
85% was considered unfathomably dark. But I was watching how much sugar goes into a 70% chocolate bar, and I was like, that's still a lot of sugar, and we're calling that dark chocolate. And so I halved the amount of sugar. 15% sugar, 85% cacao versus 30% sugar, 70% cacao. It's actually, the 70 and 85 look very, very close to each other on the numerical scale, but what we're not seeing is 15 versus 30, and there you can see it's literally half the sugar, and that has a huge impact on how cacao is absorbed. We put chocolate in our mouths, and it becomes assimilated into our bodies through the gut. And the gut is this complex microbiome of many different bacteria, and the sugar-eating bacteria are quite voracious, and they outcompete many of the beneficial bacteria, including the ones that process all the good stuff in cacao. So at 70% cacao, it's too sweet, the sugar-eating bacteria win. So you actually don't get many of the health benefits. Most of the studies on the health benefits of cacao, they're all with 85% in darker chocolate. So 85%, that's when I really realized that I stumbled onto something, because I also used coconut sugar, which is a low glycemic index sweetener, much more popular now. So that was kind of my starting thesis, just to like use sweetener minimally to take the bitter edge off the cacao. That evolved further to making 100% cacaos, because pretty quickly I realized that the sugar in many ways was compensating for various imperfections in the chocolate making process, and that if I really went into the nuance of working with the tools in the process, that I could make quite good 100%, much better than what was commonly available on the market. And also my palate was adapting to more and more bitter chocolate. You know, we live in a culture that it's not used to bitter. And especially in chocolate, we're conditioned to think that candy is sweet. But I would watch customers like have their first bite and being like, oh, that's too bitter, and then have another bite like, interesting, and have a third bite like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Like I saw that enough times that I saw that people's palates were adaptable. And the other thing with making 100% cacao is you can always add sweetener to it if you want. I do that sometimes too, but it's removing that health decision from a company and putting in each person's individual hands, because these days everybody has a different sweetener that's their preferred, you know, and that's just a choice that people should get to make individually. So that's all led me down towards 100% cacao.
That's so beautiful, and and I learned this from you. You kicked that off, the whole way that the stomach digests it, and the sugar is going to get digested like you said, it's going to win over, and then you lose all of the medicinal purposes of it. And I think a key thing that you also taught me, and worth bringing up here, is that I think, and I want to do two parts. One of my favorite nutritionists from Australia, he's a good friend of mine. He always brought up that he won't work with clients that won't eat bitters, because how much it actually cleanses. And he is like on the same page with you. He said, we need to bring bitters back. He says back because many, many years ago it was a common thing. And it's only been in this last probably like maybe 200 years, that's become more common to just be sugar, everything has to be sweet. And we lose so much. So, and I met him just before you, maybe like a couple years before I met you. And so I already had that in my head. And then when I met you, it just like pushed it over the edge. And I think what makes it different for me, and then maybe you can explain more, but with your chocolate, the other thing that a lot of people do when they get cacao is they immediately get a powder. And then what happened for me, this is my experience, when I had your cacao, it was like so creamy, and like learning how much fat is retained in your process by not overheating the chocolate and reducing all of that. I think that also makes it palatable, because you think, because I have had 100% cacao on a bar made by other companies, and it's like, whoa, it's like, because they probably put it to a powder and then made the bar or something. I don't know. But I just know that it was not okay. And then I immediately, the day I met you and I tasted your cacao, I was like, whoa, this is different.
Yeah.
Can you explain that part, that not only are you not adding sweetener, but you're giving like the whole food?
Yeah. So there's two parts to it. First, the whole food part. So it's actually really cool. The cacao bean coming off the tree, it gets fermented and then dried, and that's where the precursors of the flavor of chocolate come from. Those then get brought out through the process of roasting. You have to shell the bean, and then when you grind up the bean, it actually has about 50%, even though it's completely solid, it has about 50% natural cacao butter in it. But you can't melt the bean. It needs to be mechanically scraped apart. It breaks the cell walls, and that frees up the fat inside it. And so when you grind a cacao bean, it doesn't go to powder. It actually becomes liquid chocolate the more you grind it. It takes anywhere between 8 and 24 hours to reduce the particle size and grind the chocolate all the way down until it's completely smooth. But
you're not rushing it.
You're not rushing. Why rush it?
Yeah.
But also, the reduction of particle size becomes more inefficient over time as you're getting to smaller and smaller. So the first bit will grind down pretty fast, but then it just takes time to make it so smooth that it just melts in your mouth. And that was an absolute criteria for me for making good chocolate, was I wanted that mouthfeel of the chocolate.
Yes.
But yeah, the cacao never goes to powder. And the logical thing that most people think is, oh, you grind up a bean, you get powder. And that's simply not true with cacao. How you get cacao powder is you actually make that liquid chocolate, and then in these giant industrial presses, you squeeze the powder, the fat out, and then you get left with what's a press cake, and that gets hammered and becomes a powder. But it's actually a more industrial process to make cacao powder, and it's separating out the fat, which is... And the way cacao powder is marketed is that it's a concentration of almost all the health benefits, except that it's missing the fat. And it's marketed as, oh, it's better for you because there's no fat, but the fat is the natural carrier mechanism for all those health benefits in the cacao. So you can take cacao powder, but it's got no way to absorb into the body. So you need that fat. Yeah. And that's how nature designed it. So why even squeeze out the fat in the first place? The reason is that you take a single commodity input and you split it into multiple revenue streams. They make more money, make more profit. I actually think cacao powder is a waste product from cacao butter, which is a fairly high grade fat. It's used in cosmetics and other products, and they had to find a way to sell the cacao, the leftover, and I think that's where the cacao powder market actually comes from. It's handy to use for certain applications, but the highest quality cacao powder I've ever had has most of the fat retained in it. Okay. So yeah, you want fats, and that's a narrative that's also pervasive in American food marketing. All the low fat, no fat. So
I think that came out of like the 80s, right? Exactly. And they even started getting margarine so that they could bring in like corn products into the butters and all that kind of stuff without getting in that deep hole that we both know. The reality though, and even the idea to reduce your fat so far. But what I've learned, and you probably have more stats than me, but the brain is like close to 70% fat. And when we eliminate that fat, now you start, affecting the brain, and I know one of my teachers taught me that if you take the top 2 chess players in the world, and then you take like a Super Bowl NFL football athlete that plays the most minutes on the field, and you look at their caloric depletion, the chess players actually deplete more calories than that NFL player sitting there playing chess. And why is that? The reason is the brain. That's what it came back to the study. The brain sucks more energy than any part of our body, right? More blood, water, and fat. Mm-hmm. And so getting the good fat in our body. Did you know that going into like keeping the fat, or was it just about the creamy part? And now this is an additional like bonus that, we're giving good fat to our brain and everything, right? The whole body.
Yeah. No, we need fats to function. And I honestly, I had no idea. That was just a process I had learned in Mexico. Okay. And there was no reason to ever go to powder. And then I pieced it together afterwards that that's what was happening. Yeah. The other big part of what we do is low temperature processing. And that actually requires high quality inputs. So cacao is a natural product. Every cacao harvest, the beans change. So we actually, at a low temperature roast profile, we actually adjust our roast profile with every single batch, and our end product is slightly different with every harvest. And, Western culture has this thing for uniformity. And, you like how something tastes, that you want to taste, companies that are selling a product, they want it to taste the same way every time so they don't lose customers. And people have come to expect that consistency and flavor, but it loses that connection to nature. And in the case of cacao, the way that consistency is created is by high temperatures. And those high temperatures drive off many of the beneficial and the healthy properties of cacao. So what I experienced and saw in Oaxaca, Mexico was the roasting was actually the most delicate part of the whole process. When I first got started, not so much these days, because I think we've actually made a pretty big impact in our education on this, but everybody was asking me, is it raw chocolate? I was like, no, why raw? Like, there's no indigenous culture that makes raw chocolate. They all roast at low temperature.
Right.
I think raw, in many ways, was a reaction to the over-processing of our foods and the high temperatures. But with cacao, specifically, some foods actually do well with a little bit of temperature, and we can talk about this alchemically and from the ceremonial aspect too. Like, a healthy relationship with fire is important. And so that process of keeping all the beneficial compounds in the cacao intact by absolutely minimizing the temperature that they're exposed to everywhere in our process, while judiciously using it when necessary, that created and kept that energy of the cacao alive in a way that most commercial chocolate wasn't, because they were after consistency, and they're also masking poor quality on the inputs. And that's the other thing is, most of the chocolate in the world is bought on the commodity marketplace, where farmers receive extremely low prices for cacao. So there's no incentive for quality. It's just volume. And we've seen it. We've heard stories of people stuffing in rocks and sticks into their sacks of cacao just to get an extra 10%. Yeah. Because often the scales are even rigged 10% against the farmers. You know, it's terrible. And that's a continuation of 500 years of colonialism, of extraction from tropical communities. And so that's what most of our chocolate consumption rests on. And so to look for premium quality cacao, we're actually paying extra attention to the ferment. We're doing a 5 to 7 day ferment instead of 2 days. We're paying farmers more to only harvest the pods when they're exactly right, so that we have even sugar levels going into the fermentation. And then you can even fermentation. If you don't have an even fermentation, you get funky off flavors left and right. Yeah. We've developed specific fermentation protocols just for 100% cacao. You know, we've noticed that, if you ferment it a day too long, it doesn't taste as good as if you fermented it, a day shorter. So like, actually putting a lot of thought and care into that part of the supply chain and not buying off the commodity market, and then paying way better so that the farmers can make a good livelihood, and are actually excited by the work that they do, and that they see a future in there, and it's not a continuation of this extractivism and colonialism that their communities have suffered so much under. So all of that completely changes the energy of the cacao. Right. And the beans don't have all these often defective flavors, so then we can actually roast it at a low temperature without needing to mask anything, and what comes out is clean. Yes. It's just clean the whole way through. It's clean in our relationships. It's clean in how the ecosystem is treated. When people aren't cutting corners, they have time and desire to do permaculture because they live in those same communities. So the water from those farms runs through their town, so of course they're not going to put chemicals in it, and they're going to plant the trees to control erosion and all the things that they can do. Cacao is actually an incredible crop for tropical ecosystem preservation and protection, because it's one of the few cash crops that farmers can make money off of without needing to degrade the ecosystem in any way whatsoever. Cacao is an understory tree, so it does well in the tropical rainforest. Wow. Typically cash flows for tropical ecosystem communities is mining, cattle, or deforestation. Everything else is more subsistence agriculture, or big plantations, which are also then clear cuts and monocultures. So having a crop that can come out of the rainforest that gives people additional income in addition to the food that they're just growing for their families, that's huge. And we need more solutions like that, because tropical rainforests are under such incredible threat right now. Yeah. And so that speaks a little bit to how we even do what we do at the factory in the first place, because of the whole shift in the supply chain beforehand.
You brought up so much in that. Again, it all comes back to that love and intention, right? Because from how you're sourcing it, how you're caring for the cacao in this way and bringing it all the way to market, the whole way, it's all love. Everything I'm hearing you say. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like some 100 farms plus that now you are a part of, that you're helping that ecosystem. Is that right?
It's actually thousands now.
What? Okay.
And it's so cool, because the maximum size of a farm that we'll source from is like 5 acres. Okay. So these are really small farms. It's just hundreds and now thousands of them. So it's distributing the impact of us sourcing the cacao into the communities. It's not going to a single plantation holder that then pays workers. And actually the other cool thing is the farmers, they don't ferment their own cacao. In the traditional model, the commodity model, they ferment their own cacao. Usually they don't have enough cacao to even ferment it well in the first place, and so it gets low prices because it's not of a high enough quality to reach the export market. The model that Ora Cacao has grown up with side by side is these community fermentation centers where all the farmers will actually pitch their cacao into a central fermentation center that then has local community members hired that ferment it to the quality that can then get it to export. So the farmers actually do less work and they get paid more for it. It's just a win-win-win. And that model has been so successful that since we started, it's just replicated from one country to the next.
Okay, so way back when you told me like 100, and now
that
it's
was when we got started.
Yeah, oh my gosh, now it's over 1,000. Wow. And then it shows up in the bag right there. Yeah, that's so beautiful. So I can just hearing all the thought and the thing that comes back to the intention, and it shows up in your mouth when you put that in, like you said, it just melts in your mouth. And usually when I make cacao with a blender to get it like that nice frothy, like hot cacao in a cup, which I have almost every day, I still put one on my tongue while I'm doing it and let the cacao come into my body and almost kind of start my prayer for the day and having that in there. And so I do feel it. So everything you're saying, I feel when I have your cacao is, I haven't had anything near it. Like, I'm serious. And I've been around chocolate, my whole life. I mean, it was a whole different thing when I was younger because it was, like you said, a lot of sugar, all those things. But as I started to get cleaner diet, you try those other dark chocolates and even I would say when I was younger, I would even say I didn't like dark chocolate, but it's a lot of it because it's so poorly put together. And so thank you. Again, this is why I'm so honored to sit with you, because look at what you've done. I mean, and maybe, I don't know how much you stand back, but you just said so much from start to finish of what you've done. Yeah. And that's why it shows up in the product.
It goes back to that ethos of putting our hearts into our work, right? And that, you travel to the countries, you see where the cacao comes from. I mean, previously in my work in solar, I just saw incredible inequity when you travel to what we call developing world countries, that are, in many ways, that's the privilege that we live upon requires that sort of poverty and desperation. And that's been hundreds of years in the making. And none of us really want that. But it's these like massive global systems that we seem to be stuck in. And so going to source cacao and wanting to do it in a good way, like, it just requires a complete rethinking and reimagination of that to shift out of this extractivism that's just become the norm. And that goes into most chocolate products. And, unfortunately, most chocolate companies, they spend a huge amount of time on branding, and there's a lot of greenwashing and social greenwashing. But the truth is that the farmer just gets so little. And we just need to look at that and be like, actually, that's really unfair. And we need to pay far more for this in order for people to have hope and to be excited to do. I think one of the best metrics is, are young people excited to grow cacao? Do they see a future in that? And that's really something that makes you pause and makes you look. And when you really sit down to meet face to face with communities, it's like they have so much to share with us. We have so much to share with them. There's people on both sides of it. And I have many times said cacao is about relationship. It's cultivating and tending to those relationships and doing the best we can to do better. I look at everything that we've done, and I still feel like we have so much work to do. Even though we pay our farmers more than other farmers get paid, that's just the beginning to healing hundreds of years of inequity. I'm under no illusion that we've solved that problem whatsoever. We're looking at other parallel channels of reciprocity of how else can we help, because we've actually numerous times we've actually raised the cacao price too high. We caused other problems that we didn't anticipate by trying to pay people more. agriculture has boom and bust cycles. So if you pay people too much for cacao, they start chopping down orange trees and other crops in order to like get in on the cacao craze. I'm like, that's not sustainable either. So there's only so much that you can do with cacao price. One of the other things that we launched a year ago was actually an insurance program for our farmers, because most rural farmers, they don't even know what insurance is, nor do they have access to it. Nobody will insure a farmer making, a few bucks a day kind of thing. Yet we realized that our farmers are very susceptible to climate change, and proved itself just a few months ago in Belize, which was the first place that we started farming. There were actually agricultural fires that got out of control. People were doing slash and burn, and it was dry and it was windy. And I think about it, latest we had 42 cacao farms, 20,000 trees got destroyed. And those farmers, it's like in the traditional model, they just kind of be screwed. There wasn't even fire services. Like they were fighting the fires with buckets and anything that they could put together, and that's like, again, we take fire services for granted. It's like, it just kind of helps you begin to understand the privilege that we have. And it's like, we have a connection with those farmers. The farmers, they plant trees that last for decades. It's the short-term model of short-term buyer of like, oh, I want this at the best price, I'm going to buy it 1 year and then not the next. That doesn't work for farmers. And so we're in long-term committed relationships with the farmers. Something like a fire happens, it's like, how do you keep supporting them? Well, that's where insurance normally comes in, income replacement.
Yes.
So we've been collaborating to raise funds and send farms down there to the affected farmers so that they can recover. Right now their immediate need is food, because they didn't just lose their cacao trees, they lost all their farms and crops, and they don't normally pay money for food because they grow it all and they barter within their community. But if they've lost those farms, then how are they going to get food?
Right.
So there's many, many layers of reciprocity that we can create when we actually spend time on the ground, on the farms, and understand what the needs are. And that's actually something that I'm really grateful to say is connected back to my career in solar, because both of the companies that we worked for, we did need finding, where we'd travel to those countries and ask, like, actually, what's a good solar product for this community? What do they actually need? Rather than imposing what we think is needed. There's many products that have been designed that have flopped because they weren't rooted in understanding the people who would use them.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And with More Business, More Life, we look at who are our WOW clients, ask them what they want and need, and then give them that, and then you build your business around that, and then you're actually servicing and creating, and then sustainability, going back to it, because you're not just because if you do create something that you want to force upon someone, it typically is short-lived. You might have some success. There might be companies that have an initial success, but then it like wanes off. And in the long term, the companies that are built to last, they do this. Like we were talking about, you create this symbiosis and this long tail, as it's said, but it's sustainability. And with all this, let's shift a little bit into some of the business side of it. You think there might be business people watching this, leaders that go, oh, well, how's that going to work? And then, they might have thought when you started these ideas and you brought all this extra effort, because really it's extra effort, right? Machine testing each product. And then even like what you're saying, you source the cacao. It's not going to be the exact same because it's nature. It's going to come slightly different. And then you're tasting, okay, what our temperatures need to be? And you're doing, so again, extra. Then, a lot of people would say, oh, you're not going to make it, but you've done the opposite. You've succeeded beyond measure. Like, you continually exponentially grow and have so much success. So can you talk about that? Were you like so confident, or were you like, hey, we might bust trying to do it this way? When you put this focus, I do find like in a spiritual way that when you put people on the planet first, profits follow. And I think that's, just an overarching thing, but I mean, just real fundamental things. You've also had to watch your business. So how did you do all this extra love and work and give and pay people more and all that stuff? Did it magically happen, or did you see the things you needed to do to make this Ora Cacao succeed?
I mean, in my eyes, it was never a choice. Like, it was the only way to do it. Yep. It was the only thing that I could fully stand behind and be proud in. It meant, paring down and living pretty minimally at first, and doing a lot of the work myself until I could afford my first, high level hire to get help. Yeah. It was very, very bootstrapped. Also, that's part of the freedom that I've created through it, is to not be investor driven. We're not driven by somebody else's need for returns. And don't get me wrong, there's many applications where having investors help a business grow is super important, and we might still take that at some point, but not having that pressure, to grow organically, to grow slowly, to actually iterate on the product early on, listen to what people were looking for, see what resonates, not spend wild sums of money in places where they ultimately weren't productive, to actually learn how to handle money as we got bigger and stay within our means. Again, an engineering principle we had was fail early and fail often, just really embracing that iterative process. But yeah, it's never a question. Yeah. It's just okay, if it needs to cost more, it needs to cost more. We're going to find people who value it. And that's been without a question proven true. And that's where people, I think other people in the chocolate industry were like, oh, ceremonial cacao, that's a hippie thing. It's well, we're going to make it, taste extremely good. We're going to do it with impeccable quality that's repeatable. We're going to brand it, present it well. And we're even going to do all the lab testing that people are asking us for. We're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on lab tests to prove that there's no heavy metals in our product, to understand how each step of the process impacts our product. It's because our profit and our impact isn't measured purely in dollars. Yes. It's measured in the livelihoods of those farmers. It's measured in the health outcomes that, I read the reviews that we get every single week to inspire me, to motivate me, because they're constantly coming in of people whose lives have been changed with the cacao. And that's the ultimate success. The money is only a small part of it, in so much as we need to be able to keep doing what we're doing and to invest in having a greater impact. Yes. But really,
it's a tool. That is, for me, money's a tool, and it creates the sustainability that you're creating. And so,
and then the other question is the personal sustainability. Yeah. Am I healthier and happier? And that has meant growing the team, investing in the team over time, making smart decisions to have an amazing team, so that I can also do everything else I need to do in my life and not be ruled by the business all the time.
It's so good. Again, coming back to all the intention, all the way to the end, and having it straight from the beginning. You just knew there was no other way that you were going to do this business without caring for everyone. And I just want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, it shows. Because that's where you get that grandma's cooking feeling, how you can make the same recipe and it doesn't taste the same, and people talk about it all the time. But this is it's all love. What's the missing piece in the recipe? I often say when people talk about that, it's love. And you've brought love to the forefront in that way. And, actually that's one of our core values, is love. I put it out there. Love includes everything and everyone. That's, how we define that, but putting it as a core value for our company, it seems, spoken or unspoken, that's what you've done. So how do you, how's that for you? When you just brought that love in? Because the reason I bring it is because some people have actually said to me, because there might be old thinking, you can't have love and business. What are you talking about? It's feels like things there, right? And I'm nope, it's going to go here. And I've stuck to that. And I've never had anyone make me feel like I'm going to back down, but you too have had that experience. So I just want you to share that real quick, how it was undeniable that you're going to do all this with love.
Yeah. You actually choose your customers running a business. That's a big thing that I've discovered, is that by being authentically who we are and just staying true to that, we will find and attract the people that resonate with that. And most businesses, they don't need 1 million customers to do well. Yeah. You just need to be really thriving in your niche. And you can have an outsized impact in your niche. I've talked to other business owners. They're we would love to make 100% cacao, except none of our customers will buy it because they started making a sweetened product, and that's where their bottom line's from, and they can't just pivot out of that. Yeah. Staying authentic, I think is huge.
And we call that wow clients. It's the wow, and choosing not to be with the owl. And it doesn't mean the owl are bad people. They're just not your people. They're not the community for your product, and they're going to go find their place somewhere else. So it's not saying wrong or right when I say that, wow and owl, but it becomes an owl for us because it depletes energy, and you're trying to, fit, the square peg in the round hole because you're trying to make it. Instead, you're choosing to say, this is what we're doing. Who are the people? And vice versa. Who are the people that want this, and what do these people want? And then, like you said, you're listening, you're reading all the reviews, and then you're curating this in an amazing way.
Yeah. I mean, we've been challenged on price constantly, that for a long time, like we had to educate. And that's a big part of too, is like, we really had to share with people how this is different and put in the time. I feel like almost the chocolate making has like become a fraction of my job, and the biggest part is education, because of how, we just talked about how complex the cacao supply chain is, how complex all the variables are that go into manufacturing, and then how muddled that gets with all of this competing marketing. So we've built a brand about being really truthful with people and helping them understand a food that they love. And in that authenticity, that's where we've created trust with the customer and trusting relationships with people who come back. And then I, as a founder, I still log on to our customer service multiple times a week to see what kind of questions people are asking us, so that we can fix things that are broken and also answer questions that people have in constantly better ways, and update the content on our website. It's like, it's never done. We can always do better and serve people better. And so that's where tending to those relationships is huge, and really listening.
That's so beautiful. I want to do one more cacao question, and then I want to move into cacao and the relationship with your business, other businesses, and then even mine. Even after I learned so much from you, then I've seen other scientists more and more coming out about all the benefits of cacao. And one of them that I've been seeing coming more prevalent is that they're showing, they took cardiac patients 60 and over, and I don't even know if you saw this study. Did you see it? They gave them 2 cups, so about 16 ounces of cacao a day, and they tested double the stem cell generation.
Yeah, that's been huge lately. The science is really just catching up to all the health benefits of cacao. In many ways, pharmaceutically, it should be classified as a drug, because there's literally hundreds of compounds that impact our body and our nervous systems. One of my favorites also that is still starting to get out there, I would say, is the neuroplastic effect of cacao. Because cacao has many neurotransmitters and reuptake inhibitors that alter our brain chemistry. And if you have a daily practice like you yourself do, every day it's shifting the thought patterns and feeling patterns that you experience. And our brains are actually quite plastic. So if with the aid of cacao, we're having different experiences on a day-to-day basis, like, I would say being more grateful, being less grumpy, having more regulated energy levels, just overall a better mood, a more stable mood. These are all mental state shifts that have happened through a regular cacao practice. And I still remember the first time I woke up and had a mood that I had only previously ever experienced with a cup of cacao, a good mood. And I was like, oh my God, this is cool. Like, there's something going on that my body's actually learning from the cacao. So I say these kind of benefits are like 6 months, a year out of recurring usage, but the cacao becomes part of us. And like you said, it's you can't imagine life without it, right? It just becomes a day to day because of how much it helps. And that's only one of many of the benefits, So it's, in that way, it really is a medicine, and it works with us over time too, not just like, okay, it tastes good and it's pick me up, that's often we've noticed that as people first come to cacao because, they want a coffee replacement, or they want more regulated energy, or they want help with creativity, and then they stay because of the long lasting effects.
Yeah, it's It's so many layers. I mean, we can talk for hours about all of these benefits. And I found, for me, the only time that I've really stopped, especially with what's happened in my life, recently, as you know, with Guillain-Barré syndrome coming into my life, where for those that don't know, that are listening, and I know you know a little bit about this, but the myelin sheath on your nerves is eaten away in the similar fashion of ALS. And in that, they haven't found any way of regrowing, so it becomes more permanent at this point. But with Guillain-Barré, you have the chance, and it is a chance, because I've met a man that had in 2003, and he still can't walk. So he hasn't been able to get it back in his legs, but he did get his upper arms. So even for me to be able to walk around and all those things, I'm super blessed. But I also, the two things I noticed different when I talk to all these other Guillain-Barré quote unquote survivors, or whatever you want to call it, overcoming this, they're all asking me, how did I do it? Because at my age, like the only people that I saw do it faster healing than me were like youth, like 13-year-olds, a 4-year-old that I heard about. That youth definitely had a quick spring back. For my age group, these people are like 8 years, 6 years, 5 years, longer. I even met a woman recently that actually still has excruciating pain in her hands. She can't touch a keyboard without gloves. All these kinds of things. And so the two things that I did different, because I'm reflecting, I'm like, well, what did I do different? Well, one, I already had a different relationship with pharmaceuticals. So when they wanted me to be on all these drugs, I said no. Yeah. And that's from my family, much like you. I saw grandparents, aunts. I lost my youngest aunt. She's one of the first to pass away because they diagnosed her with things and gave her pharmaceuticals. Now, I'm not going to get into the all wrong or right, but in the evidence in my family, I saw the kidney failures, the liver failures, all the other parts that were happening. So for me, inside, and some people could say wrong or right, but I'm just telling you my experience, I said no. I literally just said no. I'm not going to have all that stuff. I'm going to stick to my food and supplements. And also I already knew about lion's mane mushrooms, which is so good for your nervous system. But then I also knew that mixing that with cacao is a driving force for absorption, because I learned even before I met you, and you might be able to articulate this more. I am going to tee this back to you, but the minerals is so important to even have vitamins. Mm-hmm. So many people are like, get your vitamins. And then you're eating tons of vitamins and you're peeing it all out because it's not absorbing. Yeah. And that's where the minerals come in, and that's where the cacao comes in, because you have the fat, you have the minerals, and so many other compounds, as you already know. You schooled me so much. But coming back to the two things that I think changed my life, my mindset. I have to say that out loud. I mean, I definitely had previously learned to meditate and be mindful, and I chose. I remember the moment when I thought, am I dying? Like, I remember, and there were a lot of tears shed, and it was dark moments, and then immediately, like, it was less than a minute, it might have even been 10 seconds, it was like, no. Like, no, you're not. And once I learned that it was my myelin, and on my eyes, I don't know if I told you, Jonas, but I couldn't blink. So I was like face paralyzed. It was full body. So they taped my eyes shut, and I said, I couldn't do anything, right? So I'm paralyzed. My eyes are taped shut. So I just went into deep meditation, and I said, I'm going to regrow my myelin. And I did have a hospital stay because I literally couldn't move. And my wife and my son, they couldn't even move me around. I was still pretty close to a 200-pound man. And so I needed facility help. But as soon as I could turn enough corner, I got out of the hospital and I went home. And then I started my daily cacao practice. And I literally remember being in my wheelchair. It was the first thing when I got home. And there's even videos on my Instagram that people can go look at. And when I got to my walker, and then I was just rewatching one, and my wife was helping me down the stairs, and I had this walker and I'm going really slow. And then you could hear on the camera on Instagram, I was like, where's the cacao? Because she's like, are you going to sit down there? I was like, yeah. And I was like looking, and I didn't see any cacao cups. And she's like, it's in the house, don't worry. Is that the only reason you're walking down these stairs? I was like, yes. And I would get my cup of cacao full of mushrooms, and I sat with my wheelchair. So this is before the walker. And I just sat in the sun, and I was just like with that, and just like letting it come into my body.
Wow.
And it was, you were part of my healing, brother.
Yeah.
Like, it's beyond like the everyday thing. Like,
It's a miracle. It's a straight up miracle. I mean, that you're with us today, you know, and the speed with which you've recovered and the grace too. It's really impressive. Yeah.
It's
and I'm so grateful that the cacao could be there with you as an ally and to support your healing so immensely, because, you know, like you said, I think you nailed it on the head. It's the cacao is a great delivery mechanism for mushrooms. You know, many supplements and lion's mane in particular, it repairs neural connections, and that's part of what you were struggling with.
Yeah.
And so it helped your body do that by really effectively delivering those mushrooms. That's often what we're missing with mushroom capsules and that kind of thing, is the fat-based delivery mechanism. And then, and I'll add to that cacao is not only, it's not only a fat-based delivery, but it also acts specifically on the heart. So the theobromine is boosting circulation, and the bitters is cleansing the body. So there's this, it's acting on multiple levels, you know, and that's really the true like genius of a medicine like cacao, is that it's acting on multiple levels at the same time, including the minerals. You know, the Western lifestyle strips our bodies of essential minerals, and our food system has less and less of the minerals that we need. So having those therapeutic minerals coming in our body is essential. You know, alcoholism, lack of sleep, stress, like all of those deplete. Like magnesium is a great example, and cacao is an excellent source of magnesium. And so those minerals are essential for our heart to function, for our brain to function, and all the rest of our organs. So all that combined, you know, I know that helped support you, but then also like the mindset, you know, and just that you were able to stay in your heart and not succumb to fear, and just have such clarity that you were going to recover fully, you know, and not die, which was the other choice.
Yeah. And just before I went to the hospital, I was sipping cacao through a straw because I couldn't drink anymore. I couldn't close my mouth because all that was paralyzing. And so I just remember, so I was getting we did a whole regimen before I went to the hospital because we thought maybe we could turn before we had to do that last resort. But so I think it was in me. And so I can't even say, like, you know, is my mindset, or how did the cacao help me with my mindset? I think it's overlapping. You know, I did have a lot of lessons like you. I had many teachers and many therapists to change who I am as a man and my connection to feelings, just as you. There's a whole nother story I won't go to today, but to come to that, then have this relationship with cacao before and after. But I will tell you, before I would have a lot of days, but maybe I wasn't a 7-day a weeker. But then through this process, bringing that in, and I guess through the whole pandemic, though, I did increase my cacao. I noticed the difference because of what it was. And, you know, there's something I want to mention before I lose the thought. And I don't know if this will be good for you to know, but during in this last year, I did a big cleanse. And in that, you know, Dr. Zach Bush. Oh, interesting. You would like him. He was a chemotherapy doctor trying to make the best chemotherapy because he had cancer stuff in his family. And so again, it was all heart. The deeper he went with the microscope trying to make a medicine to get rid of cancer, he realized that we don't need a medicine. We need to get rid of poison. And so he's changed this whole career to now move away from pesticides and everything. He's outspoken. 70% of the food in the United States has chemicals in it. And so then we're eating that, which also, by the way, is what they're finding causes Guillain-Barré, MS, Bell's palsy. All those neural deficiencies come from a saturation in that. And right before I was paralyzed, I went from, because of the pandemic, being at home, getting all organic food at my house, and then coming out of that in 2021 with my first 7 speaking engagements, I went into an area and I was so excited that I was getting back to work. I ate carelessly. And at that same time, feeling sluggish, felt really bad. I was like, wow, I'm this much out of shape. And then 4 days after returning home, I fell down. And I also know I might be the canary in the mine because my wife and I lost 4 babies. So and I'm giving all this history because I know my body. So when my son was being born, we bought this house in the country. Didn't think anything of it. They're spraying all around us because I bought 2 acres, and then you have like a 100-acre farm this way, all of these around us, literally planes buzzing. I didn't even think when I bought the property. Like, so for all the young people out there, I was younger at this time, lost 4 babies, and they told us to stop. And Texas A&M and Duke University were like, doing a study that has been kind of buried at that time, and they found that in the rural area, the type of pregnancies we lost and spina bifida and all these were prevalent, 90+% in the rural area. And so, why do I say all this? So that happened to me, and that was right about the time that I lost the weight. We moved out of that house and we had 2 baby girls. So as soon as I got away from the chemical, 2 baby girls, is then later in life I ate clean, and then at this point I lapsed because of the excitement of getting out, and I was in rural America and you can't get as much access. And then this situation happens, but it was all of these things come back to the cacao and the nutrition in my life, and back to Dr. Zach Bush. That was a long trail around. He brought all these pesticides awareness, but he also created a hydration method, because he also found when you're with cancer or disease in your body, the more hydrated you are, the better it can do. I went on this process. This is why I brought up Zach Bush, and that was a big circle, but also people can learn a little bit about my life and how possibly I was affected by poisons. So I'm doing all my regimen with your cacao, and I do Zach Bush's hydration method, and I was saturated. I started having a body reaction, and then I called them. Called the nutritionist I was working with, and this is probably maybe like 8 hours or 16 hours into this method to fully hydrate, right? Because most, especially Americans, they're not hydrated. They're like, you're saturated. Whatever you're doing, you are completely hydrated. Like, stop the method, because it's like a super hydration protocol for 4 days. And so I didn't even get through the first day.
Wow.
And then they're like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because you're hydrated at capacity. So I think, I do put spring water with the cacao, so I'm getting minerals from that, but all the minerals. And so that was a long story to just give you kudos, again, being in my life. I mean, like you and I said, there's like so many things we could talk about, the elements of cacao, but it also, because part of hydration is minerals.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a great example of just like the practical application of cacao in your lifestyle, which is complex. There's a lot of different things going on simultaneously. I had the same thing with all of my healings. If it was simple, we would have already solved it. But these chronic health issues and such, and complicated diseases, similar with mental health crises, there are many underlying factors compounding. Like, humans are incredibly resilient, but it's when all those compounding factors come together, that's when we break down. And so having the tools and the methods and all to like rebuild ourselves and put together a path towards healing is amazing. And it takes just a true desire to do it and a perseverance of the spirit.
It's so beautiful. And I think, that's why for me, my passion is helping leaders that are making change on this planet, right? Like conscious CEOs and founders, and how important cacao can play a role in that. So being you, a founder, and all the things that you went through, and I know you're the maker of the cacao, but you're also, you're making this because you made it for yourself, but you're making it for others. So how does cacao impact your life on a daily basis as a CEO?
Yeah. Many fold. But
so maybe let's pick the top 3.
Sure.
Okay.
Fundamentally, it grounds and anchors me in a connection to nature and ritual. It helps me slow down and take time for myself, just without fail. I can't drink a cup of cacao fast. It commands an attention and a presence. It's just like you can't meditate fast. It's not the point of it. It's the same with cacao. It asks you to slow down. It asks you to reflect for a moment. It asks you and it helps you to feel. And so that anchor point just increases my capacity for all my relationships, in the business and outside of the business, and just helps me function way better. I also would say that cacao helps me identify and take care of my basic needs, which when those are taken care of, then I can be at my optimal creativity. So basic needs, not pushing myself too hard, making sure I'm getting enough sleep. Cacao, unlike coffee, doesn't mask your adenosine receptors and just like hide your tiredness. Like, it has both stimulating properties, but also has relaxing properties. Sometimes I've taken a cup of cacao and been like, okay, I need to push through now, and an hour and a half later I was sound asleep and getting the sleep that I really needed so that I could wake up refreshed the next morning and like really perform.
Yes.
It's a different pace and flow to being productive. It takes a little adjustment, of course, but cacao won't support you in an unsustainable lifestyle. Instead, it'll show you where you're being unsustainable and then help you make the changes to become more sustainable. So that's on the energy level. The mood properties of cacao just help me show up as a more compassionate and empathic leader. And that's not just outward, that's inward towards myself. It helps me have the positive self-talk and the resilience to cope with the many, many challenges I face day to day in the business. There's always something happening as other business leaders. Like you're constantly being challenged somewhere where you least expect it. And it's how you show up to it and the heart that you bring to the situation that makes night and day difference. And then, so that's on the mood side of it. And then also my body's nourished. We're talking just about the minerals, it's the baseline. It's not the only thing. Obviously a healthy diet goes hand in hand with cacao. I also tell people too much cacao is a bad thing. It's a balanced diet of cacao, along with nourishing yourself with whole foods. Like when all those things are taken care of, so my energy levels, my mood, and the health of my body, then I can be creative. Then the sky's the limit. I feel like I struggle to keep up with my own creativity just because we're having so many ideas because those are taken care of, so that's huge.
It's so big, and I think I want to reinforce that just also with other studies that even or outside of cacao, but I recently came across a study from the 1950s. They actually did a 30-year, it was supposed to be 20, but they extended it, and they took the top scientists from MIT and other universities, and they were all at the top tier. And I think there was about 40, if I remember correctly. And it's kind of interesting. They didn't force anything. All they did was watch. And they watched these folks' career, and they were like the top scientists. And the whole idea was, is genius born or made? That was the idea that they were going behind. Like they're trying to study these quote-unquote geniuses to see what was happening. And what they found was remarkable, things that they didn't even think they were going to find, right? Because it was an observation study. So about half of them went on to have amazing success, and the other half plummeted. And here are the differences. Though the half that succeeded, they averaged 4 to 6 hours in their work on a daily basis, and more of them leaned towards 4 hours of intense concentration. They also had intense play, kind of like your dance. So you can, so dancing's one of them. Climbing was one of them. Music, playing instruments, you name it. Whatever their other thing was, it was as important. Like, so they said, they use the word play deep or rest deep as much as you work deep. Like you're in those things, but you're shutting those things off. And then in this group were like 3 Nobel Prizes, like books, studies, breakthrough things. The other group that were at the same level at the start, they all were in their 17-hour pluses in the lab, right? Like in their passion, right? Like we've both been there too. And we're thinking we're doing it in the name, and we're even feeling guilty if we don't show up. Like you said, you're not even taking a day off because other people you feel guilty. Like, so they went down that path, and they thought they were doing a good thing, right? Because they're pouring into the lab, they're doing their research, but then they're going home, and some of them started getting on pills or alcohol because they couldn't even fall asleep. They're, going home and just vegging out on a couch or overeating, all these things. And some even lost their life, and many of them lost their career. And basically it was the complete opposite. It was like literally like a yin and yang, white and black kind of scenario. And it came back to what we're talking about, self-care and slowing down. And that's even why I wear this turtle pendant here. And this probably came with cacao. Like I think the first turtle I bought was after I had cacao. Now thinking about that, and I don't think I realized that till this moment. I was having cacao because I had just met you, and then we were shopping in West Marin, and I found a turtle, like a piece of art. It was made in Mexico actually, and it was all beautifully painted ornamental turtle, and I have had it on my desk ever since. And so maybe now I never put the 2 and 2 together, like you're talking about how the medicine speaks to us, but since then, because you even look how fast I talk. It's the Silicon Valley. I was born in San Jose, California. My father worked for a big tech company. I was in this my whole life. And finally, to slow down, I want to tell you right now, Jonas, that it's like more than double or triple my output in my business, but also being a family man. I'm a better father, I'm a better husband because of this slowing down. And we think it's scary. And so I want to bring this back to a question for you, because we think, it's the opposite. Like, you've been in Silicon Valley, taking time off, slowing down. It's like, oh, that's not going to work. Yeah. Like, the first answer of most executives is like, well, you're either screwing over the company or you're not going to do it. But I'm having the opposite experience and you're having the opposite experience. So tell me about that yin and yang, because you've experienced both, and how it's the opposite of we thought.
Yeah. I mean, it's that slow down to go fast, right? We do our quarterly board meetings at Hot Springs. We go plan road trips when it's time to like spend a bunch of hours to do some real deep creative work, because it's that external inspiration that really feeds us, and that when we're having fun, then we're coming to our work so much more productively. And it's also about team building. It's like there's day-to-day stuff that needs to happen. You need to build really effective teams. One of the things I've learned is to build, not just have like one marketing person, one operations person, but to have two of each, so that they can work together, so that they can solve problems. And then if they need me, then we can all solve problems together. But being really, really smart about your organization design, but it also builds like longevity of culture. People are way happier when they can work 30 hours a week instead of 40, tend to their lives. And like be passionate about other things. That's almost one of the number one things, and you named it, is, if you're going to be passionate about a business, about entrepreneurship somewhere, pick something else that you're equally passionate about, and it needs to be equally passionate about, so that you're compelled to step away from your business and to tend to that.
Yes.
And then the nourishment you get from that compels you to go back to your business, and the nourishment you get from that compels you to go back to that other passion. You just bounce back and forth between the two, and thrive, and that's like, you're not successful as a business leader if you're making millions. You're successful as a business leader in the lifestyle. And so many people say that on their deathbed, at their end of life. What would they do differently? Spend more time with family, spend more time in nature. Those are the things that people most want to do. And it's like, it's that keeps it connected to like our human physical bodies. And talking just about healing process in our bodies, and through our bodies, that keeps us connected to the earth. And that's that ultimate cycle of sustainability. It's like, when we're not caring for our bodies, we're not caring for the earth, because we are the earth too, Yeah,
I know it's crazy to say, but it comes from the same infinity, like literally like stardust, and the molecules are the same in our body as else. It's just configured in a different way to be a human being versus a tree.
Yeah. And then like, it's like, yeah, exactly. Then
super cosmic all of a sudden.
That came through the cacao.
right.
But, then it immediately goes back to our food systems. It's like, are we spraying chemicals? Are we continuing to support 500-year-old systems of colonizations that just bring that problem somewhere else? Or are we listening to our bodies, and then, putting medicine into our bodies, and then becoming medicine for the world? It's holistic.
It's beautiful. And this comes back to the feelings and feeling it. And
huge part of it.
Because then we get answers from that. We're meant to feel and have logic, right? When the mind and the heart are aligned, then our reality becomes, is what I was saying that I always thought. It's because that's, it's that combo. It's not one or the other. If we get too heady, we can lose it. And then even you can be in the heart and you feel the answer, but then you still have to use your mind to put, and you did this. You felt in your heart a decision to bring Orcacao to the world. Then you mechanically, scientifically, like with your mind, start putting the machines in place to bring the love into it. You source all of the cacao in such an amazing way, getting the farmers, taking care of them, finding ways to create the whole chain so that you can keep love in the product, so that when we're having it in our mouth and we get that effect, it is this beautiful. And it took mind and heart.
And I would say also gut, healthy gut and nourishment.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Yeah.
So, what we're talking about is in contrast to what is out there. Like there are so many founders out there that are skipping meals or, getting getting their fast food delivered to them or whatever, grabbing it. And then they're now depleting instead of rising up, right? So lowering our energy vibration rather than raising it up. And so I guess I want to come to the thought that you brought, like when you have a daily habit with cacao and you start watching, because then it comes to mindfulness. What am I putting in my body? Mm-hmm. What am I doing with my time? How am I slowing that down and bringing cacao into our life on a regular basis? What would that regimen look like for someone that's just getting started? Is it going to be that we can get them set up? Because, I know for me now it's much different. I buy like on the 5 pound increments, but if someone's getting started, what would be a good regimen to get that daily thing? And then, like you said, sustaining it over 6 months or a year to see the deep integration.
Yeah. So we have a whole bunch of different cacaos, some of them pure, some of them with superfoods. Every single one of those I made for a specific purpose at a particular point in my life because it was supporting what I was going through. So I encourage people to actually try all of our different cacaos. We have a variety kit so that you can see what resonates most. People often ask us, well, which one should I use? And it's like, sit with it and see which one is delicious to you, see which one you're inspired to keep working with, and then, get a pound bag of that and start having, for some people it's daily, for some people it's every other day, just figuring out what the routine is where it makes sense. Some people are having a lot of other stimulants like coffee. Other people are already just there's a whole spectrum. So I can't really prescribe how to do it. It's about the relationship, seeing how it fits, figuring out what dosage. Some people are very, very sensitive to cacao. They need just a tiny bit. Some people, the cacao is like massively helping replenish minerals and they can have a lot and their body actually craves a lot. So it's, we have recommended dosages, but that's a starting point, and you can try and adjust from there. And I also like to, when I have the cup of cacao, like I ask it, like, how can I relate with you more effectively? What dosage should I have right now? Like any question, just like you're talking to a human, you can bring that to your cup of cacao, and then inside meditation practice, you listen, and it's especially the insights that aren't things that I could make up. That's when I know I'm getting an accurate answer. And that's guided my own relationship with cacao over 10 years. I've had moments where I've tested if I'm addicted to it and like tried to have none and looked at my mind chemistry and looked at my body symptoms. And it's actually not I would not classify it as an addictive substance at all, but I'm just happier day to day when I have it, and it has a positive impact day to day. So that's actually really freeing too, is knowing that it's not an addictive relationship, and being open to change and fluctuation in it. It's sometimes people have a bunch of cacao for a while and then the season changes and all of a sudden they want just a little bit of cacao. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, and that's that depth of relationship. Just as we were talking about cooking food, like, yes, cooking food takes time, but within that, there's so much beauty in the relationship, like taking time to chop a carrot, rather than buying pre-chopped carrots, all those little aspects of preparing food, it's putting the love in. Yep. And you just can't replace home cooking in that way. There's a nourishment that comes beyond just the physical food itself.
I'm with you, and and I have, and to your point about addiction, I've done like other cleanses just periodically through this period of healing, and then I do 12 days and not have it, and then even after that, then I did less just to experiment with it, and then during this period for me in my recovery, I found that a daily dose is still what I need, but I did play with it. What's going on was and just listening to my body and what it's saying. But as I'm building my business and wanting to make big change on this planet, it feeds me. Like you said, it helps with my creativity. It helps me with so many other things. And I think even all my choices, like even coming to the turtle to be able to slow down. Because before, when I heard people say slow down to go fast, I think that's a Chinese proverb. And I thought that was the most moronic thing I've ever heard. Because I'm like, slow down to go fast, what are you talking about? But now I can actually feel that. So it's giving that time for contemplation. And then that's, for me, this brought this relationship. And it does. I too find that when I'm drinking cacao, it forces me to sit down. And so I live behind, or I guess in front of a forest. And when off my back porch, I'm just looking at all the trees, and I will sit there and have my cacao and just stare into the trees. And I'm not even thinking about business, but then I'll go to my office and I'll solve problems, or I'll get on a meeting and make these things. And I'm not saying that was at a zero before cacao, but now it's on like an exponential level.
For our 10-year anniversary, actually all my upper level staff took at least a week off. Some of us took 2.5 to 3 weeks off. And some of us, we actually went rafting down the Grand Canyon, and it was 2.5 weeks without any input from devices. It was just nature and paddling on a river, having adventure, and the level of like mental defragmentation that happened was incredible. And it was just like a complete recharge to like come back, and be inspired and bring our full vigor to the business again. It's important to do things like that. Like, I'm coming out of that trip and being like, I should really do 2 weeks at least every 2 years.
Yes.
We'll see if I can keep it up, but it's also, I think, testament to the culture and the sustainability of the business model that we've taken, that, the CEO and our head of marketing and our head of operations can take that time off, because the whole organization knows how to support itself.
So beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beyond the end product. It's all of it encompassing, and that's what makes it such an amazing company.
Yeah, and it's it's like you can call it a lifestyle brand, but it's like that lifestyle. It really matters, just as much as the product. It's showing people that this way of being in business is possible. This way of not cutting corners and compromising in our supply chain and squeezing the farmers out of the picture, or whatever it is. That's the cultural aspect of running a business is so huge, and the impact that we have on every person that works on our business, and then also the resonant frequency that it puts out is not to be ignored.
So beautiful. I'm so thankful, and I just want to say that this is an amazing time that we've got to spend and having this interview and cover so much ground, and whether you fully know it or not, but the More Business, More Life community you've been a part of in the undercurrents, and you have shown up, you've come to a couple of the events and led some ceremonies with us, but even when you're not there, you've always been there, like, because everyone knows how much a cacao, I'm outspoken, and when something changes my life, I tell as many people. And so it's really exciting to have this conversation with you today and really like honor that relationship and then take it to a whole other level. I want this to inspire others to bring a relationship with cacao and themselves into their life, and for those leaders watching this to bring it into their business and see the change that it makes, as it has for me and as it has for you. So I just want to thank you so much, Jonas, for spending this time with me today.
Yeah, thanks for your vision, Steve, to get together and to talk cacao and talk business, more life. It's truly an honor.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for watching or listening, however you're digesting this content. And Jonas and I both care so much. If you're on our newsletter, the More Business, More Life newsletter, then reply and let us know what was the most valuable thing. What questions do you have about cacao? What questions do you have in general about business for either? And guess what? We reply. So we will reply to all those things. And if you're not on our newsletter, then all you have to do is text WOW to 72,000 7200 72000. Text WOW, and then it'll prompt you to join, and it's free. The More Business, More Life newsletter, and then we will be here to interact with you. Yes, we listened to all those replies. And again, thank you so much for listening or watching. And as always, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom. Thanks for listening to the More Business, More Life podcast. I hope you got value. And if you did, we have so many more things for you at stevenapolitan.com. You'll be able to connect with us on social media. We are active. You can ask us questions. I look forward to having you on the next show. Until then, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom.